Hey guys, in this video we're taking a look at Arturia's Minibrute 2 analog synthesizer. So Arturia sent me this synthesizer along with the Microfreak to check out. I already did a video on the Microfreak. You can check that out, kind of my first impression. So this is going to be a very similar kind of video. I'm just going to go over, tweak some sounds, audition some sounds. I'll tell you about the front panel and what the controls do, but it's not going to be an in-depth tutorial or anything like that. It's not going to be a review either because I haven't had the synth long enough to do that. So it's more of kind of like a first impressions and me just sharing my thoughts as we go along. All right, so what's included with the synth is you get the power brick, which in this case is required. I don't think you can power this with USB. And you also get a set of these little 1/8" patch cables. These are pretty cool little patch cables. They're all white. They have this little braided texture, which is kind of unique. All right, so here's the synth itself. It's pretty compact. It's almost a perfect square, but not quite. You got a 25 key keyboard here. Everything is pretty hands-on. You have a knob per function. There are no menus or screens or presets or anything like that, which is actually pretty cool. I like seeing that for analog synths. So when I first took it out of the box, it was very hefty and sturdy. It feels really, really well built. Nice wood side panels here. The keyboard feels really good. A bit on the lighter side of synth action. I would say it's hard to describe keyboard action, but I would say it's a bit lighter than the Blofeld. Maybe also a little bit lighter than the Pro 2. I'm not actually sure exactly what keyboard they're using here. But it's pretty light and quick, which is kind of nice for a synth action. The aftertouch feels really good as well. It's very responsive, much more responsive than the Blofeld, where I feel like I have to really jam my finger down. This one is very intuitive, especially for vibrato. I kind of wish there was 37 keys, but I guess that would make the synth a bit larger. Moving on, yeah, everything else feels super sturdy. The knobs, everything feels very solid. I'm not a huge fan of these kind of big bubbly plastic buttons, but they function properly and they feel pretty sturdy, so no complaints there. The jacks feel sturdy, no wobbling. The sliders have just enough friction, not too much, not too little. What I really like and what's super unique is these kind of aluminum, I'm not actually sure what material it is. Maybe it's even like a fancy plastic or something, or looks like it might be aluminum. Basically, they look kind of metal, feel super nice. I've never seen a mod wheel and a pitch wheel like this on a synth before. It's very kind of elegant. Quite impressed with the build quality so far. Everything feels super sturdy. So as I mentioned before, the synth doesn't have presets, so we're not going to be able to browse through a bunch of different sounds quickly here. So I feel like the best way is to just show you roughly what the knobs do, and then as I'm kind of tweaking around, I'll audition the sound so you can hear the general range of stuff. But at a high level, the synth has two LFOs. You have two oscillators, one slightly more powerful than the other. The other one's more like a utility oscillator. You have a mixer, in which case you can actually blend the different waves of the first oscillator, which we'll go over in a sec. You have an external input and a white noise to mix in as well, which is pretty cool. Then you have an ADSR envelope and an AD envelope, and the AD envelope is pre-wired to the amplifier. The ADSR is pre-wired to the filter, but with the patch panel, you can obviously route it in any way you want, which we'll cover in a sec here. Up here, you have the filter, which is a Steiner-Parker filter, and it's a multimode filter. So you have high pass, low pass, notch, and band pass. You can control the frequency and the resonance of the filter via some modulation. And finally, we get to the amp, where you have your standard volume, global tuning, and you have this brute factor, which is kind of a unique thing. It's, according to the manual, it's sort of inspired by the old minimoog trick where you would patch the headphone jack back into the external input of the synth and create this kind of feedback overdrive. Down here, you have your standard kind of utility controls. You have the pitch bend range. You have some way to auto assign quick modulation from aftertouch of the wheel, and that's how we're able to get that vibrato that you heard at the beginning. That's basically just wired with these switches here. You don't need any additional kind of manual routing to get vibrato, which is super cool because I personally like vibrato. You can quickly switch to wheelbase. Over here, you have a sequencer and arpeggiator, pretty standard stuff. The sequencer is similar to the Microfreak or to the SH101, where you can just program every step one by one. The ARP has a bunch of different modes. Here you can change how you sync the clock, internal USB, MIDI, and all that good stuff. And then here we get the kind of an interesting part of this synth is you have this patch panel with mini jacks, kind of like a Eurorack system. And basically almost everything that you see here is exposed here as if these were individual like Eurorack modules. And you can cross patch within the synth itself. And you can obviously use this to cross patch with other modular gear if you have that. And incidentally, this is where you use the external input here. It's actually a mini jack. And in the back of the synth, you have your standard output, a headphone jack, and your MIDI DIN, as well as MIDI USB. Right, so everything starts off in the mixer here. Like I said, the VCO1 has 3 different waveforms. You have a triangle, a square, and a saw wave, which you can blend in and mix in as much as you want. This is saw, square, triangle. And for each of these waves, there's some wave shaping type of deal going on. And each one has its unique way of changing and altering the wave to create interesting timbres. So for example, the square wave has your standard pulse width. The triangle has something called a metallizer, which I believe just folds the wave on itself. And then the saw wave has an ultra saw, which creates kind of copies of the saw wave. And for each of these, you have the ability to assign modulation. So for example, the pulse width, you get pulse width modulation, and the metallizer, you get metal modulation. You have standard frequency modulation via oscillator 2 here. And then you have your fine-tune control and glide. So that's oscillator 1. And like I said, there's a white noise thing too, which is in addition to the mixer here, which you can blend in. And then obviously you can bring up oscillator 2 here. The oscillator 2 is very, very minimal. You have sine wave, sawtooth, and square. And for each one, you can set the range. So you can have it so that this knob controls the fine tuning. You can have it sweep the entire range or fine tune. Or you can set it as an LFO, which obviously you can barely hear, but it does go into audio range. I think a VCO2 here is mainly like a utility oscillator to add either a sub oscillator or to add a bit of chorusing effect with oscillator 1 or to treat it like an LFO, but it's much less feature packed than the first VCO. And now let's start sweeping the filter here. I'll set it to low pass and we'll just do classic sweep with no resonance. Let's go 50% resonance. Nice creamy filter. And then bringing up the resonance higher. This filter does self-oscillate. So it looks like at about, I would say 90%, it starts self-oscillating. It's got a really unique, nice character. Very different from the kind of Moog and standard filters you would have heard before. Band pass, high pass. And notch. And again, you can modulate the cutoff frequency. It's pre-wired to the ADSR envelope, but obviously you can assign it to different things in the patch panel. And then, as I said, you have resonance modulation as well, which is pretty unique. And then moving on to the amp, I'm just going to demo quickly the brute force. So after about 50%, you really start to get a distorted sound. And this goes hand in hand with the filter, especially when the resonance is cranked up. You can get these really angry sounds. Especially if you find the sweet spots. And I just have a pure saw wave now, but obviously we can blend in, we can do the ultra saw, we can blend in the square wave with pulse width modulation, and then we can add a triangle wave with the metallizer. So it's pretty cool. You can get into these kind of angry territories. So let me kind of reset everything back to standards here. What's unique about this synth is that the AD envelope is assigned to the amp and not the ADSR. And that kind of tripped me up at the beginning. I was wondering why the ADSR envelope had no effect on the amplitude, but it's actually the AD envelope, which you can obviously change into like a pad. Whereas the decay kind of doubles as decay and release here. And incidentally, the AD envelope can be set to loop. So you can get kind of like a tremolo effect there. And you can set it to trigger versus gate, whereas it's not going to hold the sustain. So regardless of how long you hold it, it's just going to do one cycle. And then we can demo the ADSR envelope, which is pre-wired to the cutoff frequency here. So if we close the filter and increase that amount. Add a bit of noise. Blend in some triangle. So this patch sounds pretty good now. I'm gonna bring up some reverb and delay via Valhalla just to give us a sense of what the synth would sound like. So I have a really slow LFO controlling the pitch of the oscillator, and that's how we're getting that kind of almost like lo-fi pitchy, which adds a sense of warmth and emulates more of the vintage analogs. Bring this up here. Reduce the attack a bit. So I've added a bit of resonance modulation to LFO1, and I've increased LFO1 and assigned it to the mod wheel to control pitch modulation, or vibrato in this case. And I've reduced the attack times so we get more of an immediate sound. I've increased a bit of the brute force as well. So this is the patch we have now. Again, I'm running through the Valhalla delay and reverb. Sounds absolutely lovely right now. just to give you a realistic sense, I'm gonna remove the reverb and delay. So this is what it sounds like completely dry. So obviously the effects have a huge role to play for a synthesizer, but I feel like effects are a common thing you add to any synth, or at least I do personally. So regardless of the quality of the synth, I always feel like the effects help, but I still want to give you guys a sense of what it sounds like without any effects. So it can definitely sound warm and aggressive at the same time, but I would definitely classify this more in the modern analog for whatever that's worth. Not that that's good or bad, it's just a way of kind of describing the synth. All right, let's quickly demo the arpeggiator and sequencer here. So I'm gonna simplify this patch. Create a quick attack here. So to switch between ARP and sequencer, you just flick this little switch here. So I'm gonna set it to ARP, and then you have a bunch of different modes: up, down, random, order, up, down ×2, time divisions, and then a rate. So you hit play to engage it, and then you just hold some keys. Change the different modes. You can also tap tempo here. And then you can shift hold to hold it. I'm happy to report that the arpeggiator kind of syncs your chord changes, which a lot of the old arpeggiators didn't used to do. You used to have to time everything almost like perfectly, otherwise it would kind of glitch out and reset when you press the keys. And then switching over to the sequencer, very similar to the SH101. So just hit record and then we can program in a melody step by step. And then let's quickly demo the front panel here, or the patch panel rather. I'm not gonna have time to demo every single connection here, but basically most of the knobs and what you would typically consider ins and outs of a module, like in a Eurorack, you would have exposed here. All right, so the simplest thing we can do, I'm just gonna patch LFO 2 to the pitch of oscillator 2, which is the only audible thing now. So you can see it's sweeping the entire range because it's a completely unattenuated thing. So what we can do is use one of the two attenuators here. So instead, I'm gonna first patch it through attenuator 1, and then out of the output of attenuator 1, I'm gonna patch it there. So attenuator 1 is controlled here. So now we can hear the same thing, but now we can control the amount. All right, so I have a standard AM FM radio here. So I'm just gonna patch that into the external input here. And then I'm gonna bring up the external input here and turn on the radio.
Is a problem for the environment, and luckily a lot of countries have.
So you can think of the external input as just another oscillator. So it's getting run through the filter, VCA, and all that standard stuff. So you still have to trigger it just like any other oscillator.
Take a look at how much plastic we're eating.
So now you can treat this almost like an extra noise source with some extra talking in it.
Plastic weed. That's what they say. That's what these researchers say. Throughout everything else that you're doing, everything.
And then you can bring up the oscillator as well.
It's worth. Think of a credit card, that plastic credit card that's in your pocket. I mean,
obviously you can filter it as
you
well.
would mention a credit card right now. But if I told you, hey, you're eating that equivalent of plastic, I assume you're more going to risk to end so plastic.
So now we get the oscillator triangle mixed in with the AM radio. So we're getting this really contemporary kind of artsy art installation type of sounds. We can obviously switch it to static. And then effectively you get an extra noise source that is a little more kind of irregular than the white noise. mix in the white noise as well. So we're getting like 2 different noise sources. And you can obviously tune the radio as you're playing. And what's cool about the amp is that you can actually activate it to drone here. So we can create these experimental drone patches with the radio. Anyways, that was kind of an interesting experiment. I kind of wish the radio had a CV control over the tuning. I believe there's a Eurorack module that can do that, but... So yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up there. Let me know if you have any questions or if you'd like to see me cover some stuff here. I'm sure this synth has been covered to death because it's already a couple of years old, or maybe a year old, I'm not sure. But yeah, if you're interested in any kind of specific things, I'm probably gonna do more videos about using it in making songs, because that's sort of where I want my channel to go towards, more music making and less kind of pure gear stuff. But yeah, I still wanted to cover this thing. If I find any kind of unique patch or something that kind of grabs my attention, I'll make a separate video about that, showing you how to make the patches and stuff like that. So yeah, that was it. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next.